Predator kills the Marvel Universe. That's literally what this story is called. I'm not even clickbaiting anything here. But here's the thing to know. Predator Kills the Marvel Universe is actually a culmination of a handful of stories that Marvel has already done. There's Predator versus Wolverine, which we've covered. Then there's Predator versus Black Panther and Predator versus Spider-Man, neither of which we've covered. But this one comes in the aftermath of Predator versus Spider-Man. So while this will be a bit of a spoiler for the ending of that story, let me know if you guys want me to cover that, because the stories are really, really cool. But what this does is this initially opens up with the Guardians of the Galaxy. Of course, Peter Quill is fast asleep, and Rocket Raccoon is trying to wake him up due to the fact that they've received a distress signal. Now, the distress signal itself is actually coming from a mining ship that is operated by Stark Industries, and it's basically mining resources from one of the moons of Saturn. Now, initially, Star-Lord contacts the ship, asks them whether or not they need aid. Of course, they respond in saying that they've had a hardware malfunction, that they're adrift, and when they request permission to dock, the Guardians of the Galaxy are given permission to dock. And so initially you have Peter Quill and you have Rocket Raccoon that approach the rest of the team, Drax the Destroyer, Gamora, Groot, and it's just kind of like, hey guys, this is a simple mission. We're going to go help these guys. It's the space equivalent of a flat tire. And so once they get inside, Peter Quill and Rocket are immediately killed. Like, they're killed right off the bat. They're like the first ones to die. Peter Quill gets blown in half by a shoulder cannon, and Rocket Raccoon, we don't see how he dies, but he probably dies at the hands of some grisly fate. Of course, that leads to Drax, Groot, and Gamora stepping in, and they die immediately too. Right off the bat, folks are getting killed, which is dope, because normally these stories take like forever to get to the point where people start dying, and that's what we want to see, some superheroes get killed. Now, here's a crazy thing about this too, right? Here's what's really nuts about what's going on, because what we end up finding out here is that the Predators being led here, they're being led by a villain, because this guy says, you see, I told you, they blindly answer the call for help. That's what makes them such easy prey. Let the great hunt begin, and let Kraven be the spearhead. Now, that is a spoiler for the ending of Predator versus Spider-Man. Of course, Kraven the Hunter is involved in a Predator versus Spider-Man story, right? Predator, the ultimate hunter. Of course, Kraven's gonna be in it. But here's a cool thing too. This picks up at a Weapons Plus facility with Dr. Cornelius. Now, that's also a bit of a spoiler for the ending of the Spider-Man story, because Dr. Cornelius is involved with basically using the technology of the Predator. Specifically, he's met by General Charlotte Pett. The idea being that he's essentially creating various arms and armament, weapons programs for the US government. And that's why she says, you'd be smart to be a little more accommodating. There are a lot of cuts being considered right now, and the Weapons Plus discretionary fund is eating up $1 billion and change a year. You're in the business of weapons. You have not delivered any prototypes in over a year. And Cornelius just simply says, look, I've been really busy here. But the response of General Pett is, I need to know what we're paying for. And that's where Cornelius says, then by all means, go take a look. And of course, she kind of responds a little snarky, right? I better be impressed. You're on the chopping block. And that's where Cornelius slams the door shut behind her and just says, General Pett, meet Predator X. Because it's the Predator that he seemingly brought back at the end of Predator versus Spider-Man. Now, here's a cool thing about this. At that point, you jump to this monologue, and we're told only 1% of planets are potentially habitable. You could say that Earth won the cosmic lottery, but the thing about winning the lottery is you become a target. Others want what you have. And the Predators, the Yautja, as they're also known, want what Earth has. The Predator King is here to claim Earth, first as a preserve and then as a home. The planet's cooking itself with chemicals and industry heating up, and the Predators like it hot. And who better to lead the charge to hunt the planet to extinction than the ultimate hunter, Kraven. He had killed one of the deadliest predators of them all, a predator known as Skinner, and a hunting party had marked him as a sign of respect as one of their own. For close to a year, he'd been living among them, studying their ways, teaching them Earths, but he was still learning. Because the reality here is that when it comes to the predator race, it's really pride of the hunt. And what Craven is learning here is that despite the fact that he was brought in by the predators, that grants him no titles of nobility. He's just a dude who's there. And so, of course, he's immediately subdued and quote-unquote shown his place by the son of the predator king, whose name basically translates to graveyard, which is probably one of the most dope things that I've ever heard. But what's really revealing here is that Graveyard had armed himself with armor and weapons of Wakandan vibranium. Of course, that's a tie-in to Predator versus Black Panther. But again, it said Craven still had much to prove, and he would kneel when addressing their king. And that's the other thing that he's learning here, right? Just because they saved him and the fact that he has no titles of nobility does not mean he gets to just walk into the presence of the king with his chest stuck out in some measure of pride. No, he was humbled immediately. But he simply says, as you requested, a kill list. And he says, so I give you this, a roster of all the greatest threats on Earth. We will need to work surgically, tracking down the strongest one by one, and then we can take our time with the rest. I have only one request. This trophy belongs to me. Of course, that trophy being Spider-Man. And so at that point, you switch over to the blue area of the moon, the part of the moon that has oxygen. If you're wondering why, there's a whole history behind it, but basically the Kree were the ones that made that happen. But what he says is that with that in mind, one of our principal targets is only a spear's throw away, because what we end up finding out is that he's talking about the Fantastic Four, who are currently operating on the moon. And at this point, they have no clue what's waiting for them. That a group of the deadliest hunters in the cosmos are tracking them down. It is also important to specify here, this is not like Aliens versus Avengers, right? Where like they come from an alternate reality or anything like that. It's just the Predators exist in this universe, is really all it is. But what you get is, of course, Reed Richards being Reed Richards and talking sciencey stuff, right? That he says, I have work to do, Sue, that it's one of my computations. You know, the one that anticipates the world-threatening disasters, the doomsday algorithm, that it's been triggered. But Susan Storm just tells him, like, it was also triggered yesterday, and the day before that, and the day before that. So can I ask you, my dear husband, how often the world is not in danger of being destroyed? And Reed gives the most sciencey answer ever, right? 2.3% of the time, but only if we're limiting the algorithm's parameters to imminent disasters. And that's where Sue's like, I mean, you know, the rest of us have work to do, right? We all have work to do, right? You're not the only one that has anything to work on. So it is important that we take some time for some rest and relaxation, right? And it's also important that Reed perform his husbandly duties and take care of his wife, right? Happy wife, happy life, or so it goes. But Reed just kind of seemingly ignores that, right? And just like, the coffee's a little too cold. So he hands the mug to Johnny Storm and it's like, heat this up to 150 degrees, will you? Which of course Johnny Storm does. Now, the funny thing about this is that Benjamin Percy is very big on like under the radar innuendo. And so the response of Susan, that's disgusting, right? And Reed's like, not particularly, right? No matter where Johnny's finger's been, I assure you, the fire kills the germs. Which I love that reference to Johnny's just kind of promiscuous nature. But that's where Susan says, look, like the bigger point that I'm making here, Reed, is that if you never take a minute to slow down, we'd never know what we were working so hard for, right? I mean, we kind of have to have these moments where we sort of sit down and look around with everything that's happening in the here and now. And that's kind of where you get this moment where Reed's like, you know what? We'll live in this moment. We will stay in this moment and enjoy this moment. Kind of pointing out the idea that Ben Grimm isn't really drinking his coffee, that it really doesn't seem to be cooked right. And then Reed's arm gets blown off. Literally blown off his body. You guys knew it was coming. You knew it was coming. And that's where Craven kicks back in with his monologue, right? The Fantastic Four is a team especially dangerous to your goals. They are currently on the moon, so they have the perspective to warn the world of our arrival, and they're extraordinarily dangerous. Reed Richards is the smartest man alive. alive. Susan Storm might be one of the most powerful people on the planet, and that's not even in question. But it's more than that. They're a family. That probably will not translate. You likely do not understand what I mean when I say this. I have yet to see evidence of love among your race, but it has something to do with intense cooperation and coordination. So we have to break them quickly before they can unite. And Susan Storm should be the primary target. Her invisibility is irrelevant given your ability to pick up on heat signatures, but her force fields will protect her. Now here's the kicker about that, being able to hide herself from the predators. Technically, Benjamin Percy is right, or at least he was right at the time that he was writing this comic, because in Fantastic Four #1, the new relaunch from Ryan North, he actually established that Susan Storm can use her ability to basically create force fields, or even her invisibility, to manipulate electromagnetism, basically hiding her heat signature. Now, as far as I'm aware, that's a wholly new ability. Full transparency here, it's been a while since I read like the old Archie Goodwin, John Byrne, Roy Thomas, Jerry Conway runs of the Fantastic Four. So maybe it was established back there and I just forgot. But whatever the case happens to be, this is something she does have the ability to do. But regardless of that, her force fields are really her primary ability. And that's why Kraven is focusing so much on it. Now, of course, he also addresses the Human Torch in Ben Grimm, but it's interesting the way that he does this, because he says the Thing and the Human Torch are more accessories to Reed and Sue, directionless on their own, but formidable as part of an arsenal. When you are a wolf pack hunting for elk, you startle the herd, and then you pick off your prey individually in the chaos that follows. Divide them, separate them figuratively and literally, because once they catch up to Johnny Storm, they tear his head off. They kill him on the spot. And of course, that leads to Ben Grimm going after them directly, because they know that Susan Storm is immediately going to tend to Reed Richards. Now, of course, one of the things that Kraven does is he says, do not, under any circumstances, allow yourself into close quarter combat with the Thing. He's the very definition of brute force, and you will lose. And so that's why when Kraven says, keep him distant, that when Graveyard basically runs into a confrontation with Ben Grimm, that Kraven says, you will have to do without your trophy, because I believe the Thing to be nearly indestructible. So the best they can do is literally blast him out into space. And so as far as this comic goes, Ben Grimm is just floating through all creation and probably just suffocates in the vacuum of space. But it's still a pretty twisted way to die, because Kraven just says removal is the best strategy when dealing with the Thing. And so picking up with Susan and Reed tells her, I've lost an estimated 2 liters of blood, so I'm going to lose consciousness in the next 10 seconds. And where Susan tells him to stop talking, he says, no, this is important. Whoever they are, they did not cut me with steel or even adamantium. They couldn't have. There had to be a powerful energy discharge accompanying this cut to disrupt the tensile strength of my skin on an atomic level, which again, the Ryan North run actually establishes that if you just stretch Reed fast enough, his body won't have time to adapt and you can actually tear him into pieces. But the fact is, he says it had to be highly sophisticated tech bound together with vibranium. And so in essence, the Predators are using technology on Earth, which at the very least, while Reed does fall unconscious, it gives Susan Storm a starting point, because she's just here and we don't know if she's going to be able to contact anybody on Earth in time, or even anybody at all, because that's where the comic ends. So with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys next month with Predator Kills the Marvel Universe #2. Peace.